KC, I wanted to turn to you first to really set the scene for our audience. So why for you is this idea of compressed transformation such a critical concept in today's world?
Well, first of all, thanks, Tom, for inviting me to this panel. And it's great to have an opportunity to speak with you as well, Cynthia. And I think there's really, if you look at the technology backdrop, I would say there's really three things as it relates to what's happening in tech transformation. So first, start with what companies have done over the last 2.5 years in this unprecedented disruptive environment. Companies that have done well have leveraged technology to transform their enterprise, often through the use of compressed transformation. And just to build on your intro and what you talked about in terms of compressed transformation, the way we think of compressed transformation, it's simply saying it's translating technology, data, and AI into value, okay? So we obviously all want to do that. But it's also then doing it at speed and oftentimes with multiple transformations happening at the same time, where traditionally a lot of times that would be sequential. So that's the compressed transformation as we define it. And the exponential pace of technology innovation is here to stay. It's going to continue, which is rather exciting because it opens up probably an unprecedented period of change and positive momentum forward than we've ever seen. So it's a bit of the technology backdrop. And if I think about what you're talking about at Davos and everything that's being discussed as it relates to the macro, why is this compressed transformation important? Even with the discussion of inflation and recession, technology spend as a percentage of GDP right now is about 5%. And the view is that it will go to 7% by 2030. So it's a big increase in GDP. And in these times of disruption and uncertainty, IT spend is even more important because it really empowers the business to be able to have access to data and real-time analytics. And I know Cynthia's going to talk a lot about that, about the COVID. We have had our experiences, all of us in the last 2.5 years of pandemic. You have to move with agility and you have to be able to go rapidly during periods of uncertainty. And maybe I'll bring it home in just a study that we did and we released at Davos that Accenture did. What we found out is that because of the pandemic and also Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there's a massive impact on your European supply chain. In fact, it's going to take 2 years for that to correct. No company has 2 years for their supply chain to sort itself out. So you really need to have data and information to be able to predict and plan and meet your customers' needs, right? So that really, without that data and without that real-time information, you can't shift to the demand, capture the growth, and get what was most important to all of us, meet or exceed your clients' expectations. And then lastly, Tom, I would say in terms of why it's so important is, it's all about performance and expectations of business performance. So interestingly enough, we did research before the pandemic in 2019. And what we showed was that the leaders in digital adoption, if you were in the top 10%, you perform better, 2 times better, than what we call the laggards in technology digital adoption in the bottom 25%, the bottom quartile. We did that after we did that same survey after the pandemic hit, and what we saw is that 2 times gap widened to 5 times, right? So it really does pay off in times of disruption or uncertainty in the business to continue to invest in technology even faster than you've done in the past, because it will prove to yield business dividends.
Yeah, that's quite the change from 2x to 5x. So, and Cynthia, maybe now's a good time you'd love to hear a case study. So CFO of Audible, I understand something pretty dramatic happened to your company in the pandemic, and you really had to pivot.
Absolutely, and what KC mentioned about data, technology, and algorithm, all of those going at the same speed, we at Audible definitely saw all of that coming to life during the pandemic, definitely in the last couple of years. A couple of our people principle, move fast to make things real, and studying and drawing from technology and culture really help us focus on how do we bring these value to life for our customers. I'll talk about a few things, right? For Audible, being a digital audio media company, commuting and traveling were the top two use case for us. And obviously with the pandemic and the lockdown, those two overnight essentially were gone. And so that customer behavioral change and the macro change really drove us to really have to examine and how do we rehabituate our existing customer, as well as I think as an opportunity, introducing listening as a use case to new customer, to customers that never really thought about Audible being in their life and in their habits. And I think really thinking about adapting to these changes and use cases really quickly based on data, how do we actually reintroduce them to and re-educate them that besides commuting, there are other use cases, walking your dog, going to do your chores, doing gardening, and quite frankly, escaping the reality that all of us had experienced in the last couple of years around the globe or some of the insight and data that we rely on. And from a technology standpoint, I'll give a couple case studies real time. In front of end user, obviously, when the lockdown happened, very quickly, within about 10 days of, at least in the US, from a lockdown standpoint, we immediately mobilized and created a free experience because we know that many tens of millions of our members and prospective members, quite frankly, just families in the world are facing being at home with everybody. And so creating that free listening experience using technology to move fast was something that we were able to do. And during that year and a half of that experience and initiative, we actually reached over 25 million unique listener, bring this listening experience to life for folks from over 120 countries. So that's the end user use case. We as a content company as well, create the creative community is also a key stakeholders of ours. So obviously during the pandemic and the lockdown, physical production wasn't available for video production. What we were able to do is actually, with our deep relationship with a lot of talent and narrators, we actually even consulted with a famous British actor, Richard Armitage, to really figure out like, how do we actually take the in-home studio experience to outfit that into all of our talent's home. For those talent that doesn't have the space, we actually have talent that built in-home studio in their closet, in their bathrooms, using technology that we help them to build. We actually ship out over 100 recording kits to our talent and creative community so that we were able to continue those audio production to serve our creative community. We also, when Broadway was locked down, we went and supported that community and actually brought some of those play and worked them out into in-home studio recording setting or via some of these in-home recording kits so that we were able to actually bring the stage to tens of millions of customers' ears. So that's another way, use case, if you will, in how we use technology to really quickly pivot to serve.
And was that pivot, we're talking about compressed timeframes, was that pivot, much quicker than anything you've experienced before because of obviously COVID and various other things, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just accelerated a lot of that, some of these trends that we're seeing from a consumer standpoint, as well from our creator standpoint. But it just really goes to say what we need to do in acting really quickly and being agile.
Right. And Casey, I don't know if there's sort of any good examples from either your perch as sort of CFO of Accenture, the firm, 700,000 employees, or obviously, this big roster of clients you folks have.
Yeah, but it's so interesting because Cynthia, I hear all of your examples, and there's just so many use cases that you had within your own enterprise, right? And that just makes me reflect and think about why technology is going to continue to be so important. IT spend, we believe, will continue. And it's really due to the fact of what we're calling total enterprise reinvention. And what that really means is that every part of the enterprise, every part of a company has to really reinvent using technology, data, and AI. So you have to do that across, it's not just one area, one group, one department, it's the entire enterprise. You have to do that and couple it with new ways of working, and also making sure that you're engaging with your customers, right? That all of that's going to help you can optimize your operations, but also have opportunities to grow your top line. And so, I guess I continue to reflect on how many places that can go. So what do I mean by total enterprise reinvention? It's areas such as, core functionality and operations of finance, HR, supply chain, right? It's doing things across your enterprise of building the digital core in the cloud and replatforming your business, right? A whole new area that's really big it's ripe for technology and digitization is what we call Industry X, which is engineering and manufacturing. That's an entire new space that will have profound changes in the years to come in the area of technology. And all of that at the end of the day with a continued focus on the relevance of putting customers at the heart of everything. So when you look at how, again, reflect on what Cynthia talked about and what we're doing to ourselves, we're doing this total enterprise reinvention across Accenture, right? And we're very far along in all of the different areas within Accenture, whereas you would hope a very well-run, digitized, technology-driven enterprise, and yet we're not done, right? So we're doing that. We want to be our own best credential in this space. And when we look at it working with our clients, we're in the early stages of really beginning and then moving to do entire total enterprise reinvention. But it's really exciting because then with that, you can respond so much quicker to what will continue to be an ever rapidly changing world.
And it's great you're both CFOs, right? Because obviously the bottom line, is paramount in both your minds. So I don't know, Cynthia, when you had to make this pivot, obviously it's probably pretty expensive. So, what were those discussions like? Was it sort of, was it a case of sort of long beating your head against the wall type thing? Did everyone buy in quickly? How did it work at Audible?
I think the way that we think about it internally is at the end of the day, our North Star metric is creating long-term sustainable customer lifetime value, right? In order to create that, as Casey said, it's a whole company. It takes a village. Everybody got to be part of that value chain and creating that value in a compressed time frame in the current environment. And so I think when we break down the problem and look at it from a customer backwards standpoint, it's actually a pretty easy decision. It's the investment that we're investing into the long term. And also, I think it's really making sure that every department are part of this decision and understanding the needs to be able to invest in some of these foundational infrastructure. Now, for a native digital company, it's perhaps a little bit easier because that's where we exist. That's the space that we play in. And so from our software engineer, our human capital and the talent of our employee, that's super important. We got to be maintaining, we have to be able to build things that are bringing value to our customers, our end user every day in order to, quite frankly, keep our internal talent motivated. So it's really kind of quite a flywheel in all the stakeholders that we serve in. And I think that from a value creation, we keep our North Star on the customer and work our way backwards. That's kind of all the decision that we make.
And I know there's been another panel sort of focusing on agility in the year. So is that sort of, what's a key piece of advice, I guess, Accenture will give to its clients? I guess you have the example of Accenture, you can kind of show the benefits, but is there, sort of a playbook you sort of can hand to certain companies, or is it, case by case?
Yeah, I think there are clearly, different ways to go about this. And obviously there are certain methodologies that we use and that we empower our client teams and our clients to work with. But one of the things I would mention, you talked about a previous panel that I thought was kind of interesting too, was one of the benefits that you can get from deploying technology. which is really important to all of us. And I know they talked about this on the ESG and sustainability panel that was also hosted, is that when you do, and Cynthia, you talked about being a digitally native company, right? A lot of companies are not that, right? And they're putting in, they're spending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on, technology transformation. Well, we're very passionate here, and I know I'm sure the audience is, and clearly, that's the discussion a lot at Davos as well, is on the importance of sustainability and ESG. And so when you do this, you have the ability to, when you do a technology transformation, and I know CFOs all know what this means, because we also did a survey that showed that when most companies are looking to who's going to get everything kind of their arms around delivering on the goals and the promises that companies are making in ESG and sustainability, the majority of the time it's the CFO, right? So, but there's ways that when you're doing this spend on technology transformation, that you can embed it in from day one, right? So it's not necessarily additional spend, right? But it's something that you need to get done that does pay benefits. So Tom, I know that's a little different from like what's the playbook, but I would say that's something that we say, I would say is in the playbook that we reinforce as all of us are looking to make significant gains in ESG and sustainability. This is one way that you can use that and just embed it in.
Yeah, because as you say, all these huge things are coming along at the same time, which makes this whole thing just particularly challenging. And talking of challenges, I don't know if either of you have any sort of great or painful lessons from these processes, or sort of experiences that might help our audience going through this. I don't know, Cynthia, if you've got any.
Yeah, I actually absolutely reflecting on that question. During this, at the start of the pandemic, we were actually undergoing and planning, quite frankly, even pre-pandemic, a pretty major product launch. And in the second quarter of 2020, amidst putting out stories, getting in-home kits outfitted in our narrator homes, we were actually re-examining whether or not we should still go ahead with the product launch. I mean, at the time, there are many other kind of tales of other streaming services that may not have had as successful of a launch. But again, going back to creating value for our customer, observing some of those macro trends that we're already starting to show, and where our customer and where their needs are transforming, we still went ahead and decided that that's the right hypothesis to go down the route and to stay true to the route. And I think that payout, because I think during the pandemic, being able to create a product that are more versatile and have more availability and a variety of different content at a lower price point was really kind of the way that we were examining and we were moving forward. And so I think really staying true to that, and it could have gone many different ways, but we stay true to that. And that was a big lesson learned, at least internally across the department, that when the hypothesis is there and then the signal is there and the data is there, we continue down that route.
And as this pandemic eases, does Audible have to sort of, is there another pivot in the offing, or
I think change is the constant, as they say nowadays. And the product launch and the pandemic taught us is that our customer are fast changing. Their behavior is fast changing. And I think if we stay true to creating value for our customer in a sustainable way and focusing on how do we actually create long-term customer value, lifetime value is a metric that we use internally. That's the North Star that we're driving towards. And then, it might take a little bit longer time. And as Casey mentioned, some of these investment that we're putting into infrastructure are enablement for us to grow and enablement for us to scale globally. And so those are some of the internal capital allocation discussion that we have actively, short-term prioritization as well as the long-term.
Got it. And in case I've got to ask, I think Accenture added something like 200,000 employees sort of in recent, is it maybe the past 2 years or something like that, or even less? Is that all? I mean, how on earth do you kind of, again, is that just one of the massive challenges you have to do at the same time? It's kind of bringing new people on, and
yes.
How do you think about that?
Yes, I mean, I think, going from what Cynthia said, look, change is constant, and we always talk about let there be change here at Accenture, as well as, the pace of change is never going to be as slow as it is today, right? It will never be as slow as it is today, right? So it just means everything's going to accelerate. And so when you look at that, you think, how do you manage that? So you talked about how do we bring so many people on board to Accenture, but I think it plays to all companies, which is saying, when you look at this pace of change, which is, unprecedented and will continue to accelerate, you have to then look at your people and you have to really look at your talent. And of course, we have 700,000 people, so we look at that maybe even more than many companies, but it's the same for every company. Every business has to be able to access talent, particularly in this constrained environment that we have. And that also means that you have to be a talent creator too, not just a consumer of talent. And you need to really work to figure out, how do you upskill your talent to take them on this fast-paced journey that we're all going on together. And so we really believe that successful companies are going to really consider this and think about talent in a very different way. And you really have to think about your people in doing this technology transformation, in the skilling, the upskilling, the reskilling, retention, and the recruiting of the right skills. So in order to do that, we really think you got to look at different pools. Many companies need to look at different pools of where to get talent to be able to do this technology transformation with you. And that's one of the reasons why managed services has been so strategic for us, because what we have done, what we believe through much of our research, is that potential is greater than pedigree. And that, so we're also able to really expand our talent by the pools that we're sourcing them, that focus really primarily on skills. And so I think that's really a very different way of thinking. And we're looking for people with high learning agility from a wide variety of backgrounds, and to teach them, for high demand skills. So I think that's really an important part of everything that we just talked about on the pace of change and being able to manage with that. And I think on the other side, Tom, you mentioned what were the lessons learned, or what are the harder things? I think it's just, this is really hard. You have to be uncomfortable. You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's the pace of change, as Cynthia said, it's not going to slow down. And so that's also why we focus a lot on people and talent, and making sure that you are helping your team and leading the team that works with you day to day, but also for those of us in the C-suite, not underestimating the amount of investment it takes for all of us to get our peers, ourselves, comfortable with the amount of change, right? But it's really is exciting, though, to think about what we can all do and what technology can really enable all of our companies to do, from those digitally born like Audible, as well as those who are reinventing themselves and have been clients with us for decades upon decades.
Fantastic. And I know we're into our last few minutes. So Cynthia, I don't know if you have sort of maybe in a couple of sentences your sort of biggest takeaway from all this, or where it might go. Any sort of final thoughts from you?
Yeah, reflecting on all the things that Casey also said is focusing on, again, customer, but also treating, for us as a content company, creator is key, but employee is also the third prong of how to make all of these work. And so treating our employees' journey and their experience with the company is definitely, as much as what Casey is saying, super resonating with me, is that it's also something that we need to do, to care for the people, because as leader, we're kind of at the bottom of the pyramid, and then employee and then customer. And I think kind of that inverted pyramid is also something that we spend a lot of time thinking about at the leadership level at Audible.
I love that. I love that inverted pyramid. I think that's a really cool way of thinking about that. Couldn't agree more.
Well, I think that's a great way to end, actually, because it's fascinating. Obviously, two very different companies, Audible and Accenture, but one thing that did stand out was whether it's or sort of the need to just constantly be alert. You know, you both had sort of very similar experiences or these pieces of advice. So, well, I think with that, I know we're coming up to our time. So I just wanted to thank you, Casey. Thank you, Cynthia. Fantastic conversation. And of course, thank our audience. Thank you very much for listening.